Hi everyone, let's carry on with our reading of Masterpiece by Elise Broach. We're at chapter 19, which is called James's Problem. For the past 2 days, Marvin had worried about what to do on Wednesday afternoon. Mama and Papa had made their position clear. There were to be no more trips to the Met and no more drawings. It's James's problem now, Papa said. He's a bright boy. He'll figure something out. I know this is important to you, darling, Mama added soothingly, but you can't take the risk. It affects all of us. Marvin said nothing, quietly fretting and hoping that some brilliant solution would occur to him before Carl came at 4 o'clock on Wednesday. By 3 o'clock on Wednesday, no such solution had appeared, and Marvin hadn't even seen James since Monday. I want to go to James's room, Marvin told his parents, even if I can't help him. I have to see what's going to happen. Mama and Papa looked doubtfully at each other. Papa said, I don't think that's a good idea, Marvin. It will only make this harder for you. But what about James? He won't understand. He thinks I'm coming. Mama shook her head. Marvin, darling, there's no way to explain this to James. Your father's right. He'll have to figure this out on his own. Mama, please. Marvin felt like crying. All he could think of was James excitedly getting ready for the Met, sure that Marvin would be right there alongside him. I can't just not show up, he pleaded. Mama sighed. Mama, we're friends. His mother looked at him for a long minute. All right, she said finally, but I'm coming with you. Together they left the cupboard and darted along the kitchen baseboard. William was strapping in a bouncing canvas sling in the doorway, careening madly from one side of the doorframe to the other, his feet intermittently thumping the ground. Watch out, Mama warned as they skirted treacherously close to his fat, flailing legs. Aye, squealed William. A long string of saliva dangled from his chin. As they hurried down the hall, they heard voices in the living room. Mrs. Pompaday sounded annoyed. Of course he isn't ready. You said 4, Carl. That's what we'd planned on. James called nervously from his bedroom. It's okay, Dad. I just need a few more minutes. Marvin looked at his mother. Carl was here already. James must be in a panic. No problem, Carl said sheepishly. I didn't mean to interrupt anything. I finished early today and I thought if we got to the Met earlier, that would give James more time. More time for what? Mrs. Pompaday demanded. Isn't the art lesson at 4:30? That's what you said. Yes, that's right, Carl said easily. It's not a big deal. I'm ready whenever you are, James. Marvin and his mother crawled under James's closed door and waited at the edge of his rug, hidden by the cotton fringe. The boy was hunched over his desk, his head in his hands. They could hear him talking to himself, his voice muffled. Oh, where are you? Where are you, little guy? His shoulders shook. I haven't seen you in days. What am I going to do if you don't come? Marvin looked at his mother, horrified. Mama, he's crying. Mama frowned. Well, I'm sure he's upset, but he'll pull himself together, you'll see. James, almost ready? Carl's voice echoed distantly from the living room. James looked around, his eyes wet, his cheeks flushed. He wiped his nose furiously with the back of his hand. Yeah, Dad, just a sec. He stood up slowly and lifted his jacket from the closet doorknob. I don't get it, he mumbled, biting his lip. Why didn't you come back? Mama, Marvin cried, he can't do this by himself. Mama shook her head firmly. Marvin, we already discussed this. But James is my friend. Darling, he's a human. He can't be your friend. You come from different worlds. Why, you can't even communicate with each other. But we can, Mama, we do. Not by talking, but in other ways. And besides, that's not the only thing that matters, Marvin groaned in frustration. Why didn't Mama understand? The most important things in a friendship didn't have to be said out loud. James put his jacket on and gazed forlornly around the room. I know you'd be here if you could, he whispered into the air. I hope nothing happened to you. Mama, Marvin was beside himself. Look at him. The boy picked up his inkjet, turning the navy blue pen case over in his hand. Marvin could see the 3 gold letters on the top. I can't draw, not the way you can. I can't do it by myself. Marvin pictured James alone in Christina's office, faced with the blank paper and the tiny, perfect Dürer drawing. He looked hard at James, at his pale, worried face, the sad slump of his shoulders. He thought back to the disastrous birthday party on Saturday, the loud, indifferent boys, the scolding Mrs. Pompiday, who always seemed vaguely irritated by her son. People like James weren't treated right by the world, Marvin decided. The quiet ones never were. They were doomed to be jostled, bullied, and overlooked because they didn't know how to take up space for themselves, to insist on their own share. And now James was about to lose the one thing that had finally given him the attention he deserved. No, thought Marvin. He stared at the boy, sending every ounce of his affection and loyalty pulsing through the air between them. You're not alone, he thought. You have me. As soon as he thought it, Marvin knew it was true. He turned to Mama, suddenly determined. Mama, he needs me. I can't let him down. You and Papa always tell me to be a good friend. Of course we do, darling, but a good friend is someone you can count on, no matter what. He watched as James took a breath, squared his shoulders, and started towards the door. I'm going with him, Mama. I have to. He can't do it without me. Marvin, Mama protested, but Marvin was already scuttling out from under the heavy fringe of the rug. He rushed up the door to the brass knob, where he positioned himself in plain view. Oh, darling, his mother cried. James stopped in his tracks. Hey, you're here, he yelled. The door swung open. For heaven's sake, who are you talking to, James? Mrs. Pompiday demanded. James gingerly reached for the knob, his hand almost touching Marvin. Marvin climbed onto his finger and quickly crawled under the cuff of his jacket. Nobody, James mumbled. Well, don't do that, dear. It's odd. Resting his hand on the doorframe, Carl winked at James. Let's go, buddy. Got your ink set? Yeah, Dad, I'm ready. Be careful, Marvin heard his mother call from far below. He poked his head out from under the knit cuff and waved at her to show he'd heard. He could see James's wide grin as he and his father strode towards the apartment to the elevator, then out of the building into the grey winter afternoon. Now we're on to chapter 20, which is called The Art of the Fake. When they met Christina in her office, she greeted them in a flush of excitement. Here you are. I've been thinking about this all day. She gave James's shoulder a quick pat and beamed at him. I still can't believe my luck in finding you, James. James smiled shyly, staring at his sneakers. Oh, I know, Christina laughed. I'm embarrassing you. I do that to my nieces all the time. Carl walked over to the desk. Are those the girls in the photo? Oh, yes, my sister's children, Katie and Eleanor. She looked at the picture, her eyes shining with affection. Marvin climbed quickly up to James's collar for a better look at the photo. He liked the relaxed expression on Christina's face, the way her arms curled comfortably around the children. She looked different in the photo, unguarded. He remembered hearing Carl tell James once that it was hard for people to ever know what they really looked like. Reflections in mirrors weren't accurate, Carl said, because when you stared at yourself in a mirror, you subconsciously composed your face in a way that wasn't your natural expression. Marvin wondered if that was true when you were with strangers too. Maybe you only looked like your true self with people that you loved. And maybe that was a face you yourself hardly ever got to see, except in photos like this one. Carl lifted the frame. The little one looks exactly like you. Christina smiled. Doesn't she? And Eleanor is the spitting image of my sister's husband. Have you noticed how that happens sometimes? The genes of the parents seem to sort themselves out, and the children look like one side or the other. I told Lily she saved me the trouble of having children. Carl tousled James's hair. Well, it's not so much trouble, really. Oh, I didn't mean it in that way, Christina said quickly, glancing at James. Anyway, it's the kind of trouble I'd enjoy. Christina seemed to turn shy suddenly, bowing her head to focus on a stack of papers on the desk. Okay, these are from Denny. They're black manuscript pages, old ones from the 16th century. That's the trick to forgeries. Everything has to date correctly and show the right signs of wear. Carl frowned. But I thought you said it didn't need to be an exact copy, since you don't have to convince a collector, just some underworld art thief. That's right, Christina turned reassuringly to James. Your drawing will pass for the real thing, James, I'm sure of it. But we don't want anything on the surface to be a dead giveaway. She gently lifted the pages and set them on the table, removing the parchment overlay. The sheets were yellowed and tattered at the edges, marked by odd discolorations and blemishes. Marvin thought they showed every bit of their 500 years. The best forgers are meticulous about their materials, Christina continued. They use old paper taken from books or manuscripts of the time period. They match the historic shades of ink. They age the work with tears and smudges. With tears and smudges. There's no surer sign of a fake than an image that's too perfect. Carl nodded. Anything real has flaws. Exactly. And in the art world, oddly enough, the flaws are what show its value. James looked at the pages on the table. But what about my pen and ink set? It's not old. Can we still use that? Marvin thought, flexing his front legs. A trill of anticipation coursed through him. If the drawing had to pass inspection by an expert, no. But James, you're able to make such delicate lines with that pen of yours, so like jurors. What about the ink? Carl asked. The ink has to be brown, as it is in the original drawing. I've been working on that for the past couple of days. I have a sample to try. James, we may need you to do the drawing more than once to get it right, okay? James nodded. Okay then. Christina faced the broad wooden table. Let's set you up here. The museum closes shortly, and then Denny's going to bring you the original Fortitude. The real one? James turned to his father, looking worried. Carl raised his eyebrows. Can you do that? Just take it off the wall. There's no alarm system. Not during the day, just the guards. We move artworks all the time, Christina answered. She twisted a strand of hair, watching James. What is it, James? Are you nervous? Marvin looked at James's pale face. He was biting his lip. Christina touched his shoulder and Marvin dove for cover under the jacket collar. Don't worry, she said reassuringly. The drawing is protected by glass. You can't hurt it. I hope not, Marvin thought. He was trembling with excitement. He'd get to see it up close finally. The real drawing. Okay, James said in a small voice. Christina squeezed his arm. I'll check on Denny, she said, and fetch the ink. As soon as she left, James looked at his father. What if I break it or spill ink on it? Marvin cringed, thinking how often Mrs. Pompadey cautioned James not to spill. Carl laughed. You won't, buddy. It's in a frame under glass. We'll make sure it's safe. But Dad, it's like a masterpiece, right? Carl considered this. Well, it's not the Mona Lisa. It's not the Sistine Chapel. James looked at his father, puzzled. What makes those masterpieces and not this one? Marvin felt compelled to crawl out from under James's collar to hear the answer. I didn't say that. A masterpiece is a great work of art. It's the best of an artist's work, one of a kind. Carl rubbed his beard. But sometimes people don't recognise a masterpiece for years and years, till long after the artist's death. He hesitated. It can be hard to say what makes one work stand out from the rest. What makes the Mona Lisa so special? On one level, it's just a picture of a woman smiling. James shrugged. It is just a picture of a woman smiling. But on another level, it's so much more, his father said. It's full of secrets. Is she proud? Sorry? Flirting? In love? Look at it long enough and you might come to your own answer. But it's a painting that can be seen in 100 different ways. He smiled a little. By that standard, Fortitude could be a masterpiece, I guess. A tiny masterpiece. Yeah, James said, satisfying. Marvin gulped, wondering how it was going to feel to copy a masterpiece, or try to copy a masterpiece. Not long after Carl and James's conversation, Christina appeared with Denny, who was carrying something wrapped in a large white cloth. Denny's eyes sparkled. Hello, friends, he greeted them. And now what you've been waiting for. He carefully removed the cloth and set Fortitude in the middle of the table. Marvin inched forwards for a better look. He caught his breath. The lines were as strong and fine and lovely as he remembered. The girl gripped the line fearlessly. The lion reared up in her arms. James's voice was scarcely more than a whisper. Is it worth a lot of money? Christina nodded. We paid close to $700,000 for Justice. Jura's virtues date from the early 1500s, which makes them rare and even more valuable than most of the old master drawings. Denny nodded, his fingers lingering on the drawing's frame. The Getty was very lucky to get this one. The small size, the excellent condition, the detail, which is truly exquisite. More than 1,000 Jura drawings survive, but his virtues are in a class of their own. He paused. There's a romance to them. James looked up at him. What do you mean? Well, justice, for example. It's a universal ideal. Civilizations depend on it. Wars are fought over it, and people die for it, or the lack of it. Christina reached for the dusty volume of Jura prints and thumbed through it quickly. There's a wonderful Plutarch quote. Do you know who that is, James? Philosopher and historian in ancient Greece. She scanned the pages. Here. Justice is the first of virtues. For unsupported by justice, valour is good for nothing. And if all men were just, there would be no need for valour. What's valour? Asked James. Bravery, Carl said. Courage. Or fortitude, Denny added thoughtfully. So Plutarch is saying, if everyone were fair, you wouldn't need anyone to be brave. Christina nodded. The Greeks thought the 4 cardinal virtues were related to one another. It was impossible to master one without mastering all of them. Now, Denny smiled. Nietzsche, I need to check the pronunciation on that. On the other hand, he turned to James. Famous German philosopher, thought the opposite. He believed the virtues were incompatible. He said you couldn't be wise and brave, for instance. Marvin crawled back under the shadow of James's collar to contemplate this. It had been brave to show himself to James at the beginning of this whole adventure, after he had made the drawing. But it hadn't been very wise, probably. He thought of Jura's 4 drawings: justice, fortitude, temperance, prudence. If you had to choose one virtue, which would be the most important? Was it better to be wise or brave? Reasonable or fair? Marvin decided that the answer to that question might depend on your situation. Are you ready, James? Denny asked. He raked his fingers through his grey hair and smiled encouragingly. I guess, James said. Marvin thought he didn't sound ready at all. Carl walked around the table to stand next to him, studying the drawing. Don't worry, James, Christina said. It's more important to be relaxed than to make an exact copy. The key to a good forgery is that sense of ease, making the lines smooth and fluid, not halting. Do you know what I mean? She crouched next to James, and Marvin immediately scooted further under the collar, remembering the last time she'd caught sight of him. He could smell her mild, soapy scent, and he noticed again how lovely she was with her smooth cheeks and shining hair. Denny said softly, every drawing tells a story. It talks to you. Together, they all gazed at Fortitude. Clutching the jacket fabric, Marvin noticed the tension in the girl's sturdy body, the way the lion seemed to both lunge and recoil at the same time. A breathless hush settled over the room. The noise of rush hour traffic on the street below seemed miles and miles away. Marvin felt as if they'd all been hypnotised. Finally, Denny spoke. Jura's paintings can sometimes seem quite cold, he commented, still transfixed. But not his drawings. His drawings are full of humanity. Christina paused. But there's always something held back. It's almost as if he couldn't bear to expose his tender imagination. Marvin understood that feeling. It was as though, in his subjects, Jura saw something unbearably fragile and beautiful, and he had to steel himself to protect it from the heartless world. After a minute, Christina turned back to James, her voice coaxing and gentle. All right, James, take as long as you need. We'll check back in an hour or so, okay? Here's the brown ink. She slid a small glass jar across the table and carefully positioned one of the manuscript pages next to it. Oh, and let me clean off your pen. We can't have any trace of your old ink on it. She opened the flat case and lifted James's pen from its snug resting spot, motioning Denny towards a bottle of clear fluid on her desk. Denny, pass me that, will you? Christina poured the solution onto a handkerchief and dabbed the metal nib of the fountain pen. Then she placed the pen back in its case, turning to James expectantly. Okay? Carl bent to hug him. What do you say, buddy? All set? Yes, James answered. This time, Marvin noticed his voice didn't waver at all. Good man, Denny declared. And with that, the three adults left the room.